Brigette Jones is the Director of African American Studies at the Belle Meade Plantation Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. As a native of Memphis, Tennessee, Brigette was consumed with the difficult history of the South as a child and used that curiosity to propel her to graduate from Tennessee State University in 2014 with a degree in American and African American history with a particular focus on Southern racial studies. Brigette is a 2019 graduate of the Smithsonian Institute National Museum of African American History and Culture Interpreting African American History Fellowship Program. She has also been locally featured on Channel 2 and 5 in Nashville for her work, as well as being published contributing to writing for the Nashville-based Tennessean newspaper and Belle Meade Living magazine. I also found out last night it's also been on NPR. Maybe some of you have heard that as well. And so please help me in giving a warm welcome to Brigette Jones.
Oh, thanks, y'all. So, in my true Southern fashion, hey, y'all. So I just first want to say thank y'all for allowing me to come and for bringing me out here. I have been enthralled with the city of Chicago since I arrived. Y'all got some food in Chicago. I have eaten good in Chicago, and as a Southerner, I really appreciate that. But a little bit about me, which you did not hear. Like I said, I'm the Director of African American Studies at the Belle Meade Plantation Museum in Nashville, Tennessee, which is a very interesting job to work at a plantation in 2019 when you're black. If you didn't know, that's a little different. So it's definitely been an eye-opening experience, and it's allowed me an opportunity to really dive deeper into slavery from the academic perspective. How did slavery continue over time, and what have been the effects of slavery over time down generational lines, which is really what we're going to hone in today, which is why I've entitled the presentation Tennessee Slavery, Perspectives, Parallels, and Psychology, because there are multiple perspectives that go into the legacy of slavery. There definitely are a lot of parallels in between the antebellum society and today's society, and there's definitely a psychological component to all of that as well. So go ahead and begin. What is slavery? If you did not know what slavery was, it is known as the peculiar institution. It was dubbed that by former Vice President John C. Calhoun. Now, American chattel enslavement is what we're going to focus on. And of course, that also includes Native Americans in that time period as well. So approximately 1619 until 1865 is the time period that slavery is really interpreted for. 1619 has been argued among academics solely because the Spanish brought Africans into America as early as the 1500s, but that isn't really what's discussed. So I like to just pay acknowledgement to that. Now, one of the biggest things that I get all the time when I'm talking about slavery on a bigger scale is, well, America wasn't the only people to have slaves. And yes, we know that. America is not the first to do it. The history and the legacy of slavery traces back centuries into biblical times, but it seems that the United States, the institution, seems to have been perfected as stated by the USConstitution.net. Now, how was Tennessee involved? You know, as a native to Tennessee, the one thing that I was taught as a child growing up was, I mean, yeah, this is Tennessee, but we ain't Mississippi. I would be like, is that good? So, Tennessee is involved very deeply into slavery. 25% of the overall population of Tennessee was enslaved by 1860. That's a whole lot of people that was enslaved by 1860. 25% of white families in Tennessee owned slaves by 1860. That is not to say that everybody owned 300 and 400 people. Slaves are expensive. They are property. So in many cases, a lot of families just own one or two, and if you couldn't afford to buy one, you could rent one. Slaves are property. The same thing you can do with your car today, you could do with a person back then. The Harding and Jackson family of Belle Meade would have been among the top 4.5% of slaveholders in the state of Tennessee by 1860. They were literally the cream of the crop in their heyday. Now, being at the top of the totem pole affords the Harding and Jackson family a lot of luxury in their life. With that being said, let's see what Belle Meade looks like. Yeah, that is the Belle Meade Plantation. Belle Meade Plantation was owned by the Harding and Jackson family for 99 years. 5 generations of Harding and Jackson family members will own and operate the Belle Meade Plantation from 1807 until 1906. The house you are looking at is 10,600 square feet. The height of the property was 5,400 acres. That's 8 square miles of land owned by one family. That 8 square miles of land is technically 3 different neighborhoods in Nashville today, with Belle Meade, the city, being the top, in the top 4% of the wealthiest zip codes in the entire state of Tennessee. So the generational wealth that was established in Belle Meade in 1807 has not left to date. Now, Belle Meade was also not your typical plantation. Belle Meade wasn't typical because they didn't grow a cash crop. When most people come to Belle Meade and they get on my tour, they're like, where's the cotton field? I'm like, oh, I hate to burst your bubble. There are no cotton fields here. Belle Meade ran as a premier thoroughbred nursery. They didn't just raise regular horses. They raised the best horses. If you bought a racehorse in the 1850s or 60s, your racehorse came from Belle Meade. In fact, for the past 26 years, each and every horse to race in the Kentucky Derby has been a descendant of Bonnie Scotland, which was owned by the Belle Meade Plantation. So the legacy of Belle Meade as a stud farm is definitely a large legacy that has not yet really been compared to any other legacy in the horsing industry. Now, the Harding and Jackson family. These are some very interesting men. When I told you it's owned by 5 generations, only 4 of them will run it. When the Harding and Jackson family loses their money around 1900, it's going to pass down to a 2-year-old. And I have a 3-year-old, and I can attest that they don't really run plantations very well. So, of course, he's not going to be the one managing that property following the fall of the estate. So, to begin, first up, have John Harding. John Harding is the founder of the Belle Meade Plantation. He migrates from Goochland County, Virginia, around 1798. When they arrive in the Tennessee area, they're going to be meager farmers. They brought about 4 slaves with them from Virginia into Tennessee. They are third-generation slaveholders from Virginia. This legacy of slaveholding is deeply entrenched into the legacy and the history of their family. They weren't new to this institution. Now, John Harding will establish Belle Meade as a 250-acre tract of land in 1807. He named that land for what he saw. Belle Meade means beautiful meadow in French and Old English, and if you were to come to Belle Meade today, you could still see remnants of that beautiful meadow. It's a gorgeous area. Now, John Harding is going to manage the property from 1807 until 1839. In 1839, he's going to pass it on down to his son, William Giles Harding. General William Giles Harding, to be specific. He is a Confederate general. That general title is going to come from a generous donation that he gives to the Confederacy. Yeah. Now, William Giles Harding is going to manage the property from roughly 1840 until 1886 at his death. This is the person that's going to see Belle Meade through the Civil War and the majority of the antebellum era. Now, John Harding, his father, he's going to establish the plantation. He's going to help to build the plantation. His son is going to maintain it and turn it into the thoroughbred farm that it was known to be. Now, following the death of William Giles Harding, it's going to pass on down. Where we at now? All right, there we go. It's going to pass on down to this guy here. That's General William Hicks Jackson. The only reason it passes down to William Hicks Jackson is because William Giles Harding has 2 daughters. Sadly, in that time, ladies, you could not own property. You could not manage property. So when that property passes down, it doesn't go to Celine, his daughter. It goes to her husband, General Jackson. General Jackson is from a little town known as Jackson, Tennessee. It's about 45 minutes away from Memphis. He's going to migrate to Nashville looking for a horse, actually. He's going to come to Belle Meade in search of that horse. When he sees Celine, he leaves with the horse, her, and the whole plantation. So, great business deal. Yeah. Now, General Jackson and Celine are going to manage the property from 1886 until both of their deaths. That's subsequent 1896 and 1903. Following their deaths, it will pass on down to their son, William Harding Jackson, who dies 3 months after his father. So, very, very fast digression of the plantation. Around 1890, the estate is in about $90,000 worth of debt. That debt is accumulated in numerous ways. Of course, the Civil War plays a really big role in that. You lose your entire labor force. You now have to pay people that you did not have to pay before. You also have things like the stock market crash of 1894, the beginnings of Prohibition. Tennessee is going to outlaw pari-mutuel gambling, which is going to push horse racing out of the state of Tennessee into Kentucky. That's supposed to be the Tennessee Derby, y'all. Now, once he passes away, that estate is going to fall to his 2-year-old son. Unfortunately, he can't manage the property, neither can his mother. Mr. Richardson, his mother's father, will sell off each and every acre of that land in efforts to clear that debt. It will be cleared by 1907. A new family is living in the Belle Meade Plantation home. That house will go through 5 different owners from 1907 until 1953. And in 1954, it is donated to the Association for the Preservation of Tennessee Antiquities. Say that 5 times fast. When they donate it, it will then turn into the museum that we have today. So Belle Meade has successfully been a museum since 1954. An interesting tidbit is that I am the first African-American director in the history of that museum since 1954. So that tells you a lot about the plantation industry. Thank you. Now, the heavy stuff. One of the biggest things that I like to do is to let you guys help me be the historian. I spent a lot of my time at Belle Meade flipping through old documents, old family letters, trying to pull out references of what an everyday life was like on August 7th, 1854. And some of that stuff is very, very interesting. But since I focused primarily on enslavement, one of the biggest things that interested me at the beginnings of my development of Journey to Jubilee was runaways. I think runaways are interesting because I think the revolt of slavery, the resistance to slavery, is something that we don't really talk about a lot. People tend to shy over resistance as if it didn't happen. People resisted and revolted way more than we talk about, and some of those stories are extremely interesting. Ben here is the very first runaway to leave Belle Meade. He leaves here in 1817. Now, Ben is a blacksmith. Now, being a blacksmith is a very big job. If you did not know, slavery happens in hierarchies, just like any other social institution. Blacksmiths, stonemasons, carpenters, bricklayers. At places like Belle Meade, you would have horse trainers, jockeys, and hostlers. These specific types of enslaved individuals are known as skilled laborers. You see, a skilled laborer is going to cost you a little bit more money at the slave auction. Anybody want to guess why they're going to cost you more money? They're going to make you money. Absolutely. Because they're going to make you money, that means the skilled laborers are usually some of the most entrusted people on the property. You see, because you're a skilled laborer, you may be able to live what's known as a quasi-independent life. Quasi-independence means that you are definitely still a slave. You're just not always bound to the same sets of rules and regulations. You may can come and go a little bit more freely. You might not have to live over in the slave quarters. They may give you a better house just for you and your family also on the property. You see, Ben, that quasi-independence didn't affect Ben because of where he lived. It affected him because of where he worked. The blacksmith shop at Belle Meade did not sit on the side of the property that the house was on. It sat about 100 yards east, which means that it was not under the watchful eye of John Harding. That means that Ben is 100 yards away every single day working in a blacksmith shop without his master watching over him each and every day. You see, the blacksmith shop also sits in front of what is today known as Harding Pike. Harding Pike is a very busy street that runs directly in front of the Belle Meade Plantation. Historically speaking, the Harding Pike used to be the Richland Toll Pike. And the Richland Toll Pike was owned and operated by the Harding family. Oh, yeah. So that means that if you put your blacksmith shop on the side of your personal road, that is amazing marketing, man. Yeah. As people rode down that road every single day in need of farm tools, in need of horseshoes, whatever they needed, they could get directly from John Harding's blacksmith shop. But since John wasn't the blacksmith and Ben was, that means that Ben was 100 yards away, meeting new people from new places every single day. What do new places and new people bring? Information, new ideas, new ideals, new ways of viewing things. Things like slavery. Yeah. There's a strong possibility that Ben could have met someone patronizing the blacksmith shop that could have given him the clues he needed to actually make his escape. Because let's look at it from their perspective. Escaping your plantation ain't something that you wake up and do on Tuesday because Monday was real hard. It actually took a little bit of planning. It took some help. In Ben's case, he would have had to think about things like, what season am I leaving in? What time of year is it? What is the weather like? What direction am I going in? It's illegal to teach a slave to read and write. So they got to still figure out how they're going to get where they're trying to go without any of the necessary skills to make that happen. Now, to piggyback off of what season it is, let's look at that from their perspective. If any of us had to escape a plantation today, it would behoove us to leave in the spring, summer, or fall. You got better weather. You can see because you got more daylight. It's going to be a scenic trip. In actuality, if you're being hunted every single day, would it be smart for you to leave when you have more daylight? Probably not. You also have to remember that they're running from slave-catching dogs. The only way to throw off your scent to a slave-catching dog is to wade through water or find some mud. In the South, that equals a swamp. So now you got to think about the water moccasins. And in the South, all the mosquitoes that carried the malaria that could have killed you before you left your state. The best time to leave your plantation is the winter. You have longer periods of darkness. It aids for an easier escape throughout night hours. You don't have to worry about as many of those bugs anymore, but you have another devil to fight. What is that new devil? It's cold outside. That means you got to figure out how you're going to huff it on foot all the way through Tennessee into Kentucky, through Kentucky, into Ohio, and through Ohio until you cross the Ohio River, because you ain't free till you cross that water. The Ohio River is the Mason-Dixon line, and until you get across it, you are still a slave. Those are the things that Ben would have needed to know before he left Belle Meade. With that being said, somebody had to help him figure those things out. Now, as you read through the Runaway ad, if you are able to, you'll see that Ben is described in the Runaway ad. Let's see if we can find it. He's described as tolerably black. Tolerably black. Anybody want to take a guess on what tolerably black means? Ah, yeah. He's light bright. Yeah. We're going to remember that because we're going to come back to tolerably black at the end here. Now, Ben could have went to two separate places based on what the Runaway ad says. He could have went back to Virginia where he was purchased, or he could have went to Ohio to find his freedom. Well, since Virginia is also a slave state, it wouldn't be too bright for a fugitive slave to leave one slave state, then go to a slave state. Ben was never captured nor returned to Belle Meade. Let's all hope he found his freedom somewhere above the Ohio River. The next slave to leave Belle Meade is Ben's replacement. Yeah. His name was Ned. Ned got to Belle Meade 6 months after Ben left. Ned left 4 days after he arrived. Yep. So that means that Ned decided that he got to Belle Meade and he wasn't going to do any of the stuff that they asked him to do. And the thing is that when Ned was there, that early period of enslavement at Belle Meade from roughly 1807 until 1820, those early on slaves, they have a very different life. You see, those early slaves are the ones that had to clear all the original 250 acres of land that was purchased. They do all that for free. They chop down every tree, they build every fence, they build every outbuilding, they build their quarters, they build the mansion, they build what will become a 26-mile-long stone wall still standing in Belle Meade until this day. I bet it was back-breaking labor. Ned clearly said he wasn't going to do it, so he left. But Ned did not just escape. Ned stole a horse when he left. Yeah. So that means Ned's charge isn't just escape. It's theft. Let's separate these crimes and look at punishment. One slave stole from Belle Meade in the 1850s. He was given 80 lashes for his crime. Okay, let's combine that with escape then. You see, there's another ad in the same newspaper that I used to find Ben and Ned's ads in. Oh, but that other ad was from a much more important person of that era. Y'all might know him as former President Andrew Jackson. Yeah, you know, they called him the people's president. In his runaway ad, Andrew Jackson is issuing a $100 reward per 100 lashes up to 300. That means that if you can find him and you will beat him 300 times, I'll pay you $300 to do so. That's in the weekly newspaper. It's one ad of many just like it. I only single it out because of who wrote it, not what it says. I'm pretty sure that Ben and Ned couldn't read the paper, though. I bet they knew the punishments that were common for the crimes they committed. They knew that when they left, they couldn't come back to Belle Meade, so Ned was never found either. Let's hope he also found his freedom somewhere above Ohio. The final slave leaving Belle Meade, I haven't tracked down his ad yet. His story comes from the mouth of William Giles Harding around 1870. He's sitting in a barbershop. That barbershop is owned by a local mulatto man named James Thomas. He is the son of a Nashville court judge. Now, that barbershop is frequented by all the wealthy white men of Nashville at the time. James was a well-known barber. He's going to leave Tennessee after he's freed from slavery, and he'll go on to become a St. Louis entrepreneur where he'll write a book about his time as both a slave and a free entrepreneur. In that book, he describes William Giles Harding coming into that barbershop one day and recounting a slave named Will leaving Belle Meade in 1844 to make his way to Buffalo, New York. Now, if you did not know, Buffalo, New York used to be a haven for free black people and fugitive slaves because of how close it is to Canada. You see, Canada was known as true freedom because if you could get across the Canadian border, you couldn't be brought back into America as a fugitive slave. Canadian law protected you. Now, for some strange reason, William Giles Harding decided that he was going to hop on a train, go to Buffalo, New York, and bring his own runaway slave back to Nashville. When he got to Buffalo, he began his search inside of a black barbershop. He's quoted as saying that he had never been met with such a cold and indifferent manner before ever in his life. Yeah. When I usually have younger people on my tour that don't really understand the terminology, I frame it like, okay, look at it this way. It's 1844. He's a white slave owner in a free state in a black barbershop asking a room full of free black people, have you seen my runaway? I bet they were real cold and indifferent. Supposedly, he's so off-put by the treatment he's receiving, he decides he's leaving Buffalo to go back to Nashville without the fugitive slave. And this is where his story got a little bit troubling for me as a historian. You see, before he could board that train and come back to Nashville, William Giles Harding said that that fugitive slave had come to the train station in search of him. Yeah. He said that fugitive slave ran up to him on the platform at the train station and said, now, sir, I heard you was in town. I had to see you before you left. I was like, this man is bold. And let me tell you why he's bold. You see, by 1793, the Fugitive Slave Law had been passed. The Fugitive Slave Law of 1793 made it completely legal to chain any black person on the spot that could not prove on the spot that they were free by producing their free papers. You see, if you didn't have your free papers, they can chain you, sell you, send you wherever they want you to go, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That is the entire premise behind the book and the movie, 12 Years a Slave, and that's a true story. Now, digging even deeper into that would be to know that by 1850, that law had been amended as a result of the Missouri Compromise. It became the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Now, that gave the federal government the ability to intervene on behalf of a slave owner in the capture and return of a fugitive slave. That means that wealthy slave owners can now go petition the Supreme Court to get their property back. It issues a $50 fine and up to 1 year in prison to any person caught assisting a fugitive slave on their trek to freedom. So that means that the federal government tried to make escaping impossible and kill the Underground Railroad. So logically speaking, why would a fugitive slave that made it to freedom run up to his master that was only in the free state to find and bring him home? Better question. Why didn't William Giles Harding bring him back? He sat in that barbershop and said that he left that man in Buffalo, New York. That don't make too much sense either, do it? Leaves me with two remaining theories. One, that conversation never happened. Or two, my favorite, it happened, it just ain't happened the way it was recorded and told is happening. Yeah. You see, the recording and the telling of the history and the legacy of slavery is where stuff got a little bit tricky. Because if most black people back then can't read and write, your next logical question should be, well, who did the recording of the history and then who did the telling of it? That takes us into the lost cause. Has anybody ever heard of the lost cause? Oh, man, few people. I see some nods. The lost cause is big business in the South, especially with the interpretation of Southern history. The lost cause is an alternative history to the history of the South. It sounds crazy, I know. I'm going to break it down for you. The lost cause was first made public in 1866 with the publication of this book by the same title. See, the lost cause is brought out of the state of Virginia. That man, E.A. Pollard, wrote that book. To give you insight into the book, I'm going to quote an excerpt from it. The book says, that odious term slavery, which has been so long imposed by the exaggeration of northern writers and upon the judgment and sympathies of the world, is properly applied to that system of servitude in the South, which was really the mildest in the world and which did not rest upon acts of debasement and disenfranchisement because it elevated the African and was in the interest of human improvement. So that would mean that the lost cause is a negationist theory that promotes the idea that slavery was good for black people. Oh, yeah, it elevated us and pulled the barbarian of Africa out of us and made us almost civilized human beings, as the book also quotes. Yeah. The lost cause begins to promote the idea that the Civil War was never fought over slavery. You see, when I was a child growing up in the South, I was actually taught that the Civil War was fought for the states' rights. The first time I heard it, I was like, that ain't what my mama said. No. You see, that's interesting, though, because it's partially true. Just states' rights to do what? If you were to actually pull up the succession paperwork for the 13 states that succeeded from the Union, 6 out of the 13 even list slavery as being the reason they were succeeding in the first paragraph of the document. But the book, for some reason, didn't include that little interesting tidbit of information. The lost cause also begins to prompt the start of new organizations all throughout the South. We now know these organizations to be the sons and daughters of Confederate veterans. Most popular one, the Ku Klux Klan. Yeah. Those organizations are the ones that came together, and they began to erect all those monuments in the South. What's interesting is that those monuments didn't go up until after slavery in the 1870s, but they continued to go up until the 1960s. Those are the same monuments we're arguing over in 2019. You see Nathan Bedford Forrest, Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, Silent Sam. Those monuments were erected because white Southerners in that period believed that those men had been heroes, y'all. They were fighting for what they believed in. They dubbed it good old-fashioned Southern heritage. I'm Southern. Whose heritage? Now, the lost cause, the most interesting thing it begins to do is to interpret how do slaves feel about slavery. But they miss the mark a little bit because they only focus on one type of slave. They talk about the loyal slave. You know about the loyal slave. You see, we've been taught the loyal slave through Mammy and Sambo and Uncle Tom. You know, they do all the shucking and the jiving. Yeah, we know the loyal slave. Belle Meade has quite a few of those loyal slave narratives that we've told wrong for far too long, so now I'm blessed with the ability to tell it right. First up is Susanna Carter. See, Susanna Carter is not just your average slave. Susanna Carter is a house slave. Not only is she a house slave, she is the head house slave. Her title is the head of domestic staff. Susanna Carter has 2 conflicting stories about how she came into the world to begin with. One story comes from the plantation that gave her to Belle Meade. The other story comes from her family. Yeah. What we know to be a fact is that Susanna Carter comes to Belle Meade from the Carnton plantation. Carnton is the home of a man named Randall McGavick. Randall McGavick was the 11th mayor of Nashville. Randall McGavick's home was the site for the Battle of Franklin during the Civil War, and it served as a Confederate hospital also. Needless to say, today, Carnton is a big Confederate memorial site. If you were to go over to Carnton today and ask them who Susanna Carter was, they'd probably tell you that she was a slave born on their plantation, and that's all there is to the story. That's only interesting because if you go talk to Miss Carter's family, they're going to tell you something a little bit different. You see, they for some reason believe that Susanna Carter and her siblings were born free and biracial. They believe that Susanna Carter's father was an Englishman and that her mother was Native American and black. They believe that for some strange reason, Susanna Carter's English father left his free biracial children in the care of Randall McGavick to go on a business trip. Supposedly, their daddy died on that business trip, so Randall McGavick illegally enslaved Susanna Carter and all of her siblings. Today, we don't know which one of those stories is true. The only thing I can tell you for a fact is that in 1849, Susanna Carter arrives at Belle Meade in the last will and testament of Mrs. McGavick. Her last will and testament reads, "To my infant granddaughter, Mary Selina Harding, I give and bequeath my servant girl, Susanna. So should that child die before me, I then leave the girl Susanna to my daughter, Elizabeth Harding, wife of William Giles. Which would, by our standards today, mean that in 1849, at about 14 years old, Susanna Carter was a baby shower present. She's deeded to an infant, and she gets to spend the rest of her life referred to as the trusted house slave of William Giles Harding. Susanna Carter is given a rare opportunity post-emancipation in 1886. You see, in 1886, she's going to be interviewed in the dining room at Belle Meade. She's interviewed by a man named Charles Dudley Warner. He's a northern author that had come down south. His plan was to document the southern condition post-emancipation. Putting that simply, are we treating people better since we freed the slaves? When he arrived to Nashville, you couldn't come to Nashville in that era and not stop at the premier thoroughbred nursery in the nation, especially the one that used to own 136 slaves. When he arrived to Belle Meade, he spoke with the third generation owner, General Jackson. He asked General Jackson what could have been a simple question. He said, "Sir, could I be introduced to a real Southern mammy?" When most of us think about mammy today, our minds go to two places. If you're my age, you think Aunt Jemima, biscuits and pancakes. If you're my mother's age, you probably think Gone with the Wind. Happy, docile, dark, and love some massa. Miss Carter plays into both characters. Let's see why, though. The first question she was asked in her interview was, "Miss Carter, what did you do with the family's silver during the Civil War? I was told that you hid it for them." Her reply to Mr. Warner was, "Sir, now ain't you from the North? Sir, I can't tell you all that because you's a Yankee. And if there's another war, you going to come right on down here and you going to get that silver." When I first read this interview, I was like, she cannot be serious. Because the silver wasn't even on my list of stuff she should care about. But I had to take myself out of my shoes. This is her story. Let's look at her perspective. Let's re-examine her answer. She says, "Sir, I can't tell you that because you from the North. And since you's a Yankee, if there's another war, you're going to come right on down here to get that silver because you's a Yankee. So since you from the North, if there's another war because you from the North, so if there's another war, you know, if there's an if told me that by 1886, Susanna Carter still ain't trusting that new freedom that she had. Freedom. Let's put ourselves in her shoes for a moment. Would you believe in freedom? You've been a slave your whole life up until a few years ago. Everybody that looked like you've been a slave too, because as of 1831 in the state of Tennessee, it was illegal for free black people to reside in the state of Tennessee. William Giles Harding, he sat on the committee that enforced that law because you don't want a population of enslaved black people looking at a population of free black people, then admiring and hoping and dreaming and aspiring to all those crazy notions and ideas, you know, freedom. So you get your freedom, you got to get out of Tennessee. But she was just getting started. She also went on in her interview to say that she wanted slavery back. Oh, yeah, she said that freedom had been good for some, but that it was bad for others. This is a personal question just for you. What does a person have to actually do to you? Generation after generation, year after year, for you to be a grown woman married with 3 children and believe it was actually better for you and your family to have remained enslaved than to have your own personal freedom. You see, she also said that she feels like slaves learned more in slavery than they would ever learn in school. As the mother of 3 children, you see, I'm a mother. So as a mother of 3 children, what does that say about her hopes and dreams for educational advancement for her babies? But nothing took the cake like how Miss Carter finished her interview. You see, she finished by saying that slavery had been less the whip and the lash because it was more sharing lamb and peas with master. See, now in our day and age, it's easy for us to sit in our collective memory and say that, of course, slavery is wrong. And it's easy for us to also agree that slavery only continued as long as it did through violence and the threat of violence. You see, you got to beat people into this type of submission, be that beating a physical beating or, more importantly, a mental beating. So the fact that she could admit that she knew there was violence associated with the institution, but turn around in the same sentence and negate that same fact by saying, well, it's fine, because at Belle Meade, child, we got snack time too. What does that actually say about her psychological state? You see, if you were to argue this with a psychologist, they may tell you that she's suffering from Stockholm syndrome. That's when you develop an unhealthy dependence upon your oppressor. You learn that they got a couple good qualities too, and since you ain't gonna never escape, you might as well just go and learn to love them for it. You know, I believe they said that Elizabeth Smart had Stockholm syndrome, and that's when she didn't come home after she was kidnapped out of her bedroom window. That's interesting. But if you were to ask someone that has been to or worked in a prison about this, well, they may tell you that she was institutionalized. That means that you ain't had freedom in so long that once you got it, you didn't want it because you didn't even know what to do with it. The major point that I like to do is draw parallels between then and now. Let's begin. If prison is the new slavery like they say it is, then if you look at the prison system, right, and the interesting amount of people that look like me that go to the prison system, the very interesting amount of time they get before they even get to the prison system, the fact that they get to the prison system, get 3 hots, 1 cot called that rehabilitation, and the mass majority of those prisons in 2019 are for profit. And then I guess we might be on to something then, huh? But then there's that other question. You see, people hate to ask that other question because that other question it holds up a mirror to your face. You see, reading interviews like Miss Carter's have soothed consciences for years. It allowed people to say stuff like, well, they said they were happy. Honestly speaking, in 1886, as she's sitting in the dining room of the 10,600 square foot home, that same dining room that she worked in all of her life, in 1886, as she's sitting at the dining room table with the man that used to own her, the same man that still employs her, sitting at the table with some random white guy that popped up on a Tuesday talking about, tell me the truth. In 1886, is Susanna Carter in a position to tell the truth? You see, that's interesting because it brings us to a new theory. You see, Susanna Carter's in a very peculiar position here. You see, the institution of slavery is awkwardly interpreted. We don't begin to see that, though, until the 1920s. You see, W.E.B. Du Bois in 1903, he writes a book entitled The Souls of Black Folk. It's the first sociological chronicle of the black experience in America. But in that book, W.B. Du Bois describes this thing known as a veil. He says that black people wear a veil when they talk about their experience being black. But you see, slaves used to say the same thing in a different way. Slaves used to say that I got one mind for the white folk to see, and then I got another mind that I know is me. You just don't see that veil depicted academically until about 1929. You see, Fisk University is a historically black college in Nashville. Fisk University is where W.B. Du Bois went to college for his undergraduate degree. Now, Fisk University in 1929 sent a woman named Ophelia Egypt throughout the South and began the Fisk Slave Narrative Project. It was the first of its kind. You see, those interviews are some of the most chilling depictions of what life as a slave actually was like. You see, those interviews will really make you take a long, hard look in the mirror at yourself and your bias. You see, those interviews had me sitting in the Fisk Collections office as a 21-year-old senior in college attempting to write my senior thesis, but I had to change my subject because I couldn't get past that people treated people that way. Those interviews are powerful, but you got to go to Fisk to read them. They were never publicly published. They were never publicly published because they're part of the Fisk Collections. And you see, Fisk, along with a lot of other historically black colleges and universities, are severely in debt today. They need that collection. Now, a few years later, in the 1930s, as a result of something known as the New Deal, the Works Progress Administration is established. See, the Works Progress Administration was a predominantly white organization that heard about what Fisk had done. So they did their own slave narrative project. The WPA slave narratives, you can find those in the Library of Congress. You can read them for free. Now, I do believe that the WPA narratives were well-intentioned. But you see, they have a different undertone to them. You see, in that second set of interviews, you don't get all that heart-wrenching realness. You get a whole bunch of, well, you know, sir, I ain't never received a beating I don't think I deserved. That's a direct quote from an interview taken in Nashville in 1937. So what you may actually have happening here is that the answers to the questions began to change all based upon the color of the person that was asking all the questions. Du Bois called that a veil. You see, in the 1890s, a poet by the name of Paul Laurence Dunbar, he wrote a poem, and he had called the veil something different. He called it a mask. You see, in the 1960s, a woman by the name of Maya Angelou, she took that same poem and she added a couple of stanzas to it because, you see, by the 1960s, times hadn't changed that much and neither had the terminology. The poem says that we wear the mask. It grins and lies. You know, it hides our cheeks and it shades our eyes. So this debt that we pay to human guile, and today this is known as code switching. See, code switching means that in 2019, people of color still feel the need to have to shift and, fluctuate in between cultures and societies. We must readily make ourselves more accessible, more acceptable, more articulate, more approachable, more palatable, because essentially you can never be too black in front of white people. That makes them uncomfortable. So in reference to her interview given in 1886, before any of these terms have been academically coined, all the way back in 1886, as a black woman in the South sitting in that dining room in 1886, as she's talking amongst that man that used to own her, the one that still employs her. In 1886, as a former slave of the Belle Meade Plantation, could Susanna Carter have been wearing a veil or a mask? Could she have been code switching? We're also taught that house slaves live this much better life because they house slaves. Question, is there a better life for a slave? Or is being a slave? It don't really matter where on the plantation that you be. Let's explore that. Slaves at Belle Meade, field slaves in particular, they work 6 days a week. They work 6 days a week from sun up to sundown. They call it from dark until dark in the family letters. So then you work 6 days a week and you go home every day to a 15 by 15 shack that you share with 8 to 10 people. Your rations are bacon and cornmeal. You receive 4 pounds of bacon and 1 peck of cornmeal a week. So let's put all that together. That means that you get up 6 days a week from sun up to sundown. You come home every day after your long, hard shift to a 15 by 15 box that you share with 8 to 10 people, and the only food they think y'all need is bacon and cornbread. Glamorous, right? In comparison to the people that worked in the house, they typically would have lived in the barracks that were available for them above the kitchen. Yeah, they live in the house. They typically eat a little bit better too, but child, if you work in the kitchen with all of the food, even I would have ate better, even if I had to steal it. They typically tend to dress a little bit better too. If you look at that picture of Miss Carter, she's not poorly dressed. She doesn't look beaten, malnourished. But is she better dressed than the women like her? Are they better dressed because Master loved them a little bit more? Or are they better dressed because they're the specific property that's going to be standing in that beautiful dining room as he entertains all his real important guests and friends? And so since they are just as much of his property as the dining room table is, and when they look real good, guess who else look real good too? House slaves didn't get that 1 day off a week at Belle Meade, though. You see, they work 24/7. They're on call 7 days a week. You see, they're on call via a box known as Annunciator. Any Downton Abbey fans in here? Oh, yeah, you've seen an Annunciator before. It's a box. At Belle Meade, it has 22 numbers on it, representing 22 of the rooms in the house. Each one of those rooms is equipped with a doorbell-like button. If you press the button, it's going to send a current to that box via a dry cell battery in the basement, which was the precursor to electricity at Belle Meade. So once that bell rang, an arrow would swing up near one of those numbers and show one of the enslaved which room to go be of service to. You see, it was an intercom system for the 1800s. Do you know how rich you got to be to have an intercom in the 1800s? I'm going to tell you how rich you had to be. It's 2019 and I ain't got an intercom yet. Sadly. But what it really says is that somebody had to be in that space, near that space, or around that space at all times of the day and the night to ever even hear that bell. A better life, right? Now, the one thing that I left out of this is the number of slaves. I told you that there were 136 people at Belle Meade by 1860, putting the Hardy and Jackson family into the top 4.5% of slaveholders in the state of Tennessee by 1860. The only thing I left out of that statistic is that out of that 136 people, 11% is mulatto by 1860. That means that out of 136 people owned by the Harding and Jackson family, 11% pop up somehow, some way, half black and half white. Now, I can't tell you where the mulatto slaves came from because I ain't keep that part of the record, but what I have learned in 28 years of life is that mulatto people, they don't fall out the sky or nothing. It can be assumed where they must have come from, but I will operate in fact. I'm a historian. I don't do assuming. Let's just explore all of our options. At most plantations throughout the South, which slaves would master and his colleagues and his business partners and his overseers and his friends and his family and whoever else was in and out of his house on a regular basis, which slaves would they have enough access to? Would they see enough and be around enough that they could begin to develop some sort of an emotional or physical, like a sexual attraction to? At most plantations, it's going to be women like Miss Carter that work in the house. Those are the women that cook and clean, the ones that tighten his wife's corset every morning. Now let's play a game. Let's put ourselves into the shoes of every person involved in this scenario. You see, the most interesting thing I found through my study thus far is that slavery didn't just affect the black people. Oh no, common misconception. Slavery played a very interesting psychological game on the minds of white people too. Because honestly speaking, y'all, think about it. How must master's wife feel to have to look into the face of her husband's indiscretion every single day and know that there was nothing that she can do about it because y'all know black folks ain't got no rights, but somebody else ain't had too many rights. White women. You can't walk up to your husband and tell him what he could and should be doing, child. That's not your place just yet. So when she has some understandable anger and aggression and resentment, when she can't go to her husband about it, who can she go to? How must that slave feel, though? Think about it. How must it feel to know that you're bearing the brunt of someone's anger and aggression and resentment for a situation that you did not ask for, nor can you control? Now, what if, just what if, that slave pop up pregnant by master? Oh, now how must master's wife feel? How must it feel to, look into the face of your husband's indiscretion every single day? What can she do? She has two options. She can tell herself that they're free property, and she can go work them, make some money out of them. Other option, I can sell them, so I don't got to look at them every day. You see, that was the best option. That was the most common option. You see, down in Louisiana, New Orleans to be specific, they had the highest concentration of pretty high yellow people. They gave a fair price for pretty yellow babies. The entire state is known for their high concentration of pretty yellow people. Louisiana is infamous for pretty yellow people. But then how must the slave feel, though? Because them her babies. It don't matter how they came into this world. That's her flesh and her blood. Those are her family. That's her children. You see, I'm a mother. I can only imagine. Think about it. How must it feel to have to wake up every day and look into the face of the man you had your children by? Look at that man every single day and know that to that man, my babies, my children, my flesh and my blood, my family, if we want to keep it real, his babies, his children, his flesh, his blood, to that man, my babies, our babies, to that man, my babies are free property. They can be bought and sold at will. In actuality, they're not even really my children. What would that do to you over time? But then how must it feel to be the child? Oh, think about it. How must it feel? I mean, how must it feel to have to grow up on a plantation every day with your daddy? I'm talking about your biological father. How must it feel to know that that's your father, but also know that to your father, you just free property. He could sell you today and he won't think about you tomorrow. You share his blood, but you ain't his kin. What would that do to you over time? Now, what if master got kids with his wife? Oh, you see how everybody's implicated here. Now you have two sets of children. They live on the same property. They have the same blood, but they're going to live two completely separate perspectives, all based upon the color of their skin. Think about it. How must it feel to have to look at your siblings every single day and watch them grow and do and see and be things you never will, all based upon the color of your skin? What does that do to you over time? But somebody was always left out of this narrative. Because what if, just what if, That slave had a husband the whole time, too. Because as a grown man, and I'm talking about as a grown man, as a grown man, how must it feel to wake up 6 days a week, from sun up to sundown, go work, come home to a 15 by 15 box that you share with 8 to 10 people, split bacon and cornbread with 8 to 10 people, get in bed next to your wife every single night and have to look at her in her face and know that she has been and she is being violated. But it ain't nothing you can do about it because you somebody property, baby. You can't protect her because, baby, you can't even protect you. So then think about it. How must it feel to have to watch your wife's stomach grow for 9 months with a seed that ain't yours, and even though you know who the seed belongs to, it ain't nothing that you can do about it because you somebody property, baby. You can't protect her. Child, you can't even protect you. Now think about it. How must it feel to watch a baby be born? I'm talking about watch a baby come out of your wife. A baby whose shade of brown gonna come out a whole lot lighter than your shade of brown. So now you got all that proof that you've been waiting on and looking for. But in the midst of that, you know that ain't your baby. So, but you ain't got no options. You love it and you love her as best as you know how. But in the midst of loving it and loving her, what did it do to you? Your mental, your emotional, your physical, your spiritual, your sense of self-worth, your self-esteem, your self-image, your self-respect, generation after generation, year after year. If you want to be specific, I'm talking about 246 years. What does it do to a people, to a culture, generation after generation? You see, they called it a peculiar institution. Even that was an understatement. Moving on. Bob Green. Bob Green's at the top of the food chain at Belle Meade, too, because he's the head hostler. You see, head hostler means he's over the training and the grooming of every horse that's on that property. Belle Meade ran as a premier thoroughbred nursery and stud farm, which means that Bob Green is a very valuable asset to the continuation of their operation. Bob Green came to Belle Meade in 1828 as an infant. He and his mother were William Giles Harding's wedding presents. And he will continue to live and work for that family from 1828 as an infant until 1904. He spent his entire life at the Belle Meade Plantation. Post-emancipation, Bob Green was one of 72 full-time paid workers to continue working for the Harding and Jackson family. Did 72 people stay because the Hardings were wonderful slave owners that treated them so much like family? Not exactly. People stay because they have no options. You see, we teach that emancipation happened. We just don't teach how emancipation happened. So let's play a game again. Let's imagine that you've been a slave your whole life. You can't read. You can't write. You ain't never left that plantation before either because you see it's illegal for you to leave because you property. So if you leave, you'll be arrested, you'll be beat. You see, you can't leave that plantation. That's where you belong. So then you can't read, you can't write, you've never left. What do you do on Tuesday when Union soldiers gallop up and read off the Emancipation Proclamation? Do you understand it? When they realize that you were left behind, they tell you that you are hereby and ever forth free. You can go now. Where you gonna go? What you gonna do? How you gonna get there? Who gonna help you get there? Who gonna help you do what you're trying to do when you get to where you're going? You see all these questions, they had no answers. Abraham's Lincoln plan, he decided that he wanted to divvy up all the plantation owners' land, give everybody 40 acres. Well, we know Abraham Lincoln didn't make it. So when Andrew Johnson took over in his place, he decided that he's gonna feel a little bit bad for those southern slave owners. So he took that 40 acres back. You at square one, you have nothing. You stay because it's a game of survival and self-preservation is still the very first rule. So Bob Green stayed. He became the highest paid of 72 people. He made $25 a month. So since he's the highest paid, let's talk about the low. William Giles Harding paid his efficient hands $12 a month. The rest of the men made $9 a month and the women made $6 a month. But they believe if you give them all of their money at one time, then they'd be lazy once they got it. You know, that's always funny to me because they worked for free for 246 years. Yeah. But to combat the laziness, he decided to split their salaries in half. He gave them half of their money at the end of the month and saved the rest of it, y'all, to the end of the year. So if you made $6 a month, oh, you only got 3 of it until December. Did they get the rest of their money at the end of the year? Well, that part of the record wasn't kept either, so we can only hope for the best. Bob Greene passed away in 1906. It made local headlines because Bob Greene was a big deal in Nashville. When he died, his last wish was to be buried under Belle Meade's noble soil, as he called it. And they granted him that request, and he was buried at Belle Meade, but they didn't even keep up with the record. So in 2019, I couldn't even tell you where the famed horse trainer Bob Greene lies to rest in the multi-million-dollar neighborhood that is Belle Meade today. Freedom, right? Nannies, midwives, wet nurses, and children. Nannies are very interesting. Nannies work a threefold job in that period. You could just be a nanny. That is the same thing that we know and think of as a nanny today. You help to rear and raise and love children that are not yours as if they are. How must it feel, though, to help rear and raise a child that's going to own you one day? If you're not a nanny, you could be a midwife. Then you help bring these babies into this world. How must it feel to help bring your future master into the world? Last but not least are the wet nurses. You see, they breastfeed master's children. The same children that's going to own you one day, you breastfeed. Oh, man, how must it feel? But then, think about it, though. You see, like I said, I'm a mother. I know that the only reason that her breasts are leaking is because she just had a baby, too. So if you're in the house feeding them children, who's feeding your children and where? You see, if you're a house slave, in most cases, your babies grow up out in the slave quarters with an older slave woman. She's too old to do physical labor at this point. Her job is to now act as a mammy to the slave children while their parents work. Your babies grow up drinking cow and goat and buttermilk and whatever else is available, which could lead to malnutrition, but that's all right. It's common among slave children. Nobody bats an eye. You see, that then leads to not only malnutrition, but that leads to a separation between mother and child, because we know that breastfeeding is a bonding mechanism between mother and child. So if you didn't get to bond with your mother because somebody else was bonding with your mother, then what did that do to the familial structure down generational lines? Last but not least, though, are those children. Because think about it. Master's children, if you did not know, and slave children grew up playing together. It's very, very common. Because honestly, plantation life is lonely. It has been over-glamorized on TV because they got real pretty dresses and they have real fancy balls. I know. In actuality, everybody is hot and sick and uncomfortable. And you're bored. If you live on a 5,400-acre plantation, your neighbors are in another zip code. You play with who you have. In that case, they have each other. So master's children and the slave children play together until they're too old to do so. This lends itself towards a bigger truth, though, because in that time of legalized and moralized hatred, if master's children and slave children can play together and see no difference, then maybe, just maybe, hatred is taught and not born. In this case, though, these two children must be separated. This separation happens somewhere between the ages of 5 and 8. You have to separate those two children and tell them who they are and where they sit in the social order. Somebody gets amazing news one day. You get told that, baby, you're going to own all this property one day. Congratulations. Somebody else found out that they were the property. Between the ages of 5 and 8, what do you do with that information? How do you process that information? How do you compute that information? Most importantly, what does that information do to you over time? Better question. What did that information do to us over time? See, the most interesting thing that happened is that these notions were perpetuated down generational lines. Before you knew it, you had raised one generation of people. They're going to inherit the same world, but they're going to develop two completely separate perspectives upon the same world. Because you see, one side of that generation is going to inherit generational traumas like financial illiteracy and educational disadvantage. The other side is going to get the polar opposite. And even if you don't get blessed with the financial gain, you got blessed with the ability that is just being, just being, safely being, and having your own view and opinion, because those views and those opinions have never really been challenged before. You see, the most interesting thing about this is that the past does nothing except bleed into the present. Because a nation that didn't learn from its history the first time around has done and will do nothing but continue to repeat it in different ways, get this, with a different group of people every time. Joe Carter. Joe Carter is born in 1861. He's listed as a valet driver and a manservant. Manservants, ladies' attendants, body servants, they are all kind of what we would consider a personal assistant today. In many plantations, those types of slaves are going to even sleep on the floor at the foot of master's bed because they are to be on call 24/7. Now, what you'll find is that Joe Carter, because he's born in 1861, he only spends a short time of his life a legitimate slave because slavery technically ended in 1865. But Joe Carter is definitely one of the 72 that chose to stay at Belle Meade post-emancipation as well. The most interesting thing about Joe Carter is that he is Susanna Carter's son. So I told you there are two conflicting stories about Miss Carter. One story says she's black. One story says she's biracial. I even told you that we don't know which story is the truth. Well, that's her son, and he a little melanin deficient to me. Yep, he lacking a little color. Now, I can't tell you who Joe Carter's father is said to have been. On the census record, Susanna Carter marries a man by the name of Isaac Carter. Isaac Carter is also listed as being one of the 11% that was mulatto on the property. So if you have two biracial parents, you can come out that light. Very, very possible. But if Isaac is his daddy, then that only tells me who Joe's father was, because if Isaac is mulatto too, then who Isaac daddy? You see, that's a big problem with the study and interpretation of the history and legacy of slavery in the South, because for so many plantations, history like that, plantations that got a history like that, man, over time, so many parts of that history and that story got looked over, neglected, flat out lied about in efforts of preserving reputations, because the status quo is just as important then as it is today. You see, Joe Carter and his family, despite all we've talked about today, they did fine in life. But Joe Carter gave his final interview in 1943. In his interview to the Nashville Tennessean, he described Belle Meade as a noble farm comparable to none. His wife ended the interview by saying that if more people would have been like the Hardins and Jacksons, that the world would have been a better place. The interviewer even noted that he had a big picture of William Giles Harding hanging on the wall. When I first read that interview, I could have threw my laptop into a wall. Like, what? How? That man owned you and your mother and your father and your siblings and 130 other people that look just like you. Why? And then I had to ask myself the hardest question of my academic career to date. Could it be, could it be that these people actually had some sort of relationship, tie, connection to the very same people that own them? See, as much as I hated to have to admit that to myself, it's real possible. Because if that is the only family you've ever known, and if that is the only treatment you've ever been subjugated to, then who was going to ever tell you today and that was wrong? But then, that same question I asked you back in 1886, it still applied in 1943, because honestly, y'all, in 1943, in the state of Tennessee, if you did not know, the Ku Klux Klan was founded in the state of Tennessee, an hour away from where Belle Meade sits right now. So in 1943, down in the state of Tennessee, at the height of Jim Crow segregation, in 1943, when black bodies dangle from magnolia trees as strange fruit in the same reasons for no other reason than the fact that they are black. So in 1943, when we can't sit on the same part of the bus, go to the same school, use the same water fountain, in 1943, in the state of Mississippi, it would have been illegal for me to look a white woman in the eye as she passed me by on the street. In 1943, was Joe Carter in a position to tell the truth to the newspaper? Despite all we discussed today, as I stated, the Carters did fine. They graduated from every historically black college in the city of Nashville. They went to Tennessee State, they went to Fisk University, they went to Meharry Medical, they went to American Baptist. They became doctors and dentists, teachers and preachers, attorneys and judges. One of them is currently the vice president of public relations and marketing for the NFL currently. Oh, they're doing real good today. It's amazing to see what you can become in spite of what you've been through, huh? But they still share one thing in common. They bring us right on back to slavery. I told you we revisited. See, the Carters are still tolerably black today. See, they still look just like that. You see, the most interesting thing slavery did wasn't when it separated the black from the white. It was when it found a way to separate the black from the black. That's called colorism. It's when you quit focusing on the fact that all of you are black, so you focus on what shade of black you are, whether you are lighter skinned or darker skinned. Let me show you how far that legacy stretched. I was born in 1991 down in Memphis, Tennessee. My family was enslaved 2 hours away from Nashville in Grand Junction, Tennessee on the Ames Plantation at the Hunt House. You see, slaves don't really get a last name. They take on the last name of their slave owner so that they'll always know who they belong to. In 2019, my grandmother's family are still the Hunts today. Now, ain't that a legacy to hold on to? My grandmother, as you can see, is what we would call high yellow in the South. That's about as close to white as you're going to get and still be black. That's her mother right there. And you see, you only get this shade of light for one very interesting reason. In many cases, for my grandmother, it was the most simplistic reason of them all. 4 generations of her family dating into the 1830s are the mulatto descendants of the Pruitt family. The Pruitts owned a neighboring plantation in Grand Junction. The Pruitts are still real wealthy down in the city of Memphis today. You see, that's called generational wealth. You see, the Pruitts know this story. They've talked to us about it, but we don't have any of that money because it's called generational wealth, which baffles me because it didn't spread to my side of the generation. That's another story for another day. But what I will say is the Pruitt family left a lasting mark on my family. You see, my grandmother would often tell my brother and I when we were growing up in the summertime that we couldn't go outside and play too long in the summertime. Anybody want to guess why? Yep. She said, come on out there, son, y'all, before you get black. And when I was a kid, I used to be like, man, she mean and crazy. And then I grew up. And I realized that the only thing she had done is pass down the same advice that had been passed down to her. You see, around 1935, somebody probably told my 10-year-old grandmother that, baby, if you can just stay this this close to white, your life gonna be a little bit easier. So in 2005, my grandmama pulled that same advice out and she dusted it off and she told her brown grandbabies, if you're light, you all right. If you're brown, stick around. But if you're black, in 2005. So today we stand here and we're just the last remnants of a peculiar institution. Our goal, our only goal, should just be to use the information and the tools that we have to be better. August 20th, 2019 marks the 400-year anniversary that the first documented Africans arrived in the Americas. But you see, 2019 also marks the 154-year anniversary of their descendants' freedom, which means that as of 2019, black people have only been free from slavery 154 years. There are people alive 100 years old, which would mean that either their parents or their grandparents were born a slave. So when people wonder why they just don't get over it already, for somebody it was yesterday. Let's break down that 154 years. You have 90 years of Jim Crow segregation. You follow that up with a heroin epidemic. You follow that up with a crack epidemic. You follow that up with mass incarceration. And then we got Obama. We made it, didn't it? I'm going to leave you with one question. What was freedom supposed to look like to a people that had never seen freedom before? You see, for so many black people, this is where history starts and stops. It ain't Africa to go back to, even if we wanted to. That history been gone so long, we quit looking for it. This home now. At some point in our family legacy, somebody like this stepped out into a world one day and they began to define freedom for themselves because they themselves had never seen it, so they winged it as best as they knew how. And here we stand today, still trying to figure out what does freedom look like. Still trying to figure out if we're entitled to it yet. Thank you for listening.
Thomas Jefferson, one of the main writers of the Declaration of Independence, had slaves at Monticello. And you have to wonder what was going through his mind as he lived a life in that kind of economy. And also, I think it's interesting that we hold him in such high esteem, although he was really living a life very much out of integrity. Any thoughts about that?
Yes, Thomas Jefferson actually says that he knows that slavery is a moral wrong, but he also says that he is so deeply intertwined in the economics of slavery that he can't see a way out. So Thomas Jefferson is a very complicated individual because he's morally conflicted concerning the institution of slavery, but it's in his best economic interest to continue with the the institution of slavery and promoting that institution. Thomas Jefferson also has biracial children by Sally Hemings. Sally Hemings is his wife's half-sister. They're to this day having 3 separate family reunions. You have one family reunion for the white Jeffersons that don't want to deal with this fact. You got another family reunion for the mixed family that's trying to come to terms with it. And then you got the family reunion for the black Jeffersons that's tired of trying all together. So Thomas Jefferson's legacy at Monticello is one that still troubles American history today, because we're trying to figure out how can you be this wonderful leader but also uphold this horrible institution.
How much of what you presented today do my black brothers and sisters know today?
I think most black people have a basic level knowledge of their ancestry. They may not know what plantation they came from, but they'll know things like possibly where their plantation could have been. They'll know things like, well, Grandma so-and-so is said to have been half white. They'll know things like, well, I know that my uncle is said to have been lynched, or he was chased out of town in 1932. So most black people have a basic level understanding of what slavery was and what the effects of it were, but I don't think that your average person in general deeply understands the psychological ramifications over time. So when I have African Americans on my tour, a lot of them even leave and say, I knew, but I didn't know. Not like in that way. Hi.
Thank you, and thank God for you.
Thank you.
I know a very interesting woman from Jackson, Mississippi, who has an opinion that I don't necessarily agree with, and I'd love to hear your perspective about the monuments to the Confederate soldiers. Her opinion is that leave them up so we don't forget. Her sister has another interesting theory about the Confederate flag. My land of Lincoln blood boils when I see the stars and bars. Her sister's opinion is it's a loser flag, so when you fly it, you're telling everybody you're a loser. So,
I like that one.
just any thoughts you may? Okay.
Yeah, no, I sometimes straddle the fence on how I feel about the Confederate monuments, because Frederick Douglass says in 1878 that black people must be America's moral compass, because if we allow the world to forget what happened, then the world will forget what happened. So to an extent, I do believe that the monuments should stay so that people can always remember what those people did. However, those monuments are never interpreted all the way correct. So what I feel like is a better answer is A, put them in a museum dedicated to Confederate history, or B, put a plaque in front of the monument and tell the other side of the story. Yes, sir.
I'm curious about, I find a lot of black people from the South seem to be extremely offended by the Confederate flag. But in my estimation, the Stars and Stripes drips with 10 times more blood than the Stars and Bars, so I don't understand how they can reject one and embrace the other. Could you speak to that anyway?
I wholeheartedly agree with you, man. Yeah, no, I think Southerners hate the Confederate flag just solely because of specifically what that flag represented. But you do have a lot more black academics that are beginning to look at the American flag in the same way. Honestly, living in the South, if I see somebody riding with a Confederate flag on the back of their car and another person riding with the American flag on the back of their car, that gives me the same feeling either way. So it's like, oh man. So I think it's a very valid point. I think it's a deeper conversation, because they represent the same thing.
I'm going to stop